October 12, 1944, 0218 hours, Hürtgen Forest, Germany. A cold mist clung to the pines like a living thing, twisting and crawling between the trunks as if it had a mind of its own. The silence was unnatural, too still for a frontline forest, too quiet for men who'd spent the last week listening for every snapping twig. Then the quiet broke. Somewhere in the dark, a German sentry froze. He couldn't see it, but he felt it, an unsettling vibration rolling across the forest floor, faint but growing. His hand tightened around the stock of his Kar 98K. The sound was wrong. Not artillery, not armor, not footsteps. Something else. A low metallic whir, a rising hum, a pulse like machinery winding itself up to kill. He blinked into the fog. The trees were silhouettes. The ground was shadow. Then, a streak of orange fire ripped upward from inside the American lines, as if the night itself had been slashed open. A roar followed, tearing through the silence in a long, terrifying scream. Everyone in the forest knew that sound now. The forbidden weapon. The new one. The one they weren't supposed to be hearing at all. The American soldiers called it many things. Some joked it sounded like a mechanical banshee. Others simply called it the launcher. But the Germans had a different name for it, a name whispered in dugouts and passed from foxhole to foxhole. Der schrille Tod, the shrill death. You can almost feel the air ripple as the projectile spiraled overhead, an unnatural, corkscrewing howl that dug into the chest as much as the ears. Men instinctively ducked, not out of discipline, but out of something older, something primal. The sentry hit the ground, pressing his helmet into the mud as the weapon screamed past. There was no time to breathe before the forest lit up. A burst of flaming fragments raining down, bouncing, burning, skittering like red. The men who carried fire. The flames of Hürtgen still clawed their way toward the sky as dawn crept in, thin, gray, indifferent. But a few hundred yards behind the American line, the forest was quiet. Too quiet for what those men were preparing to do. Sergeant William "Red" Harrison knelt beside a muddy log, his breath ghosting in the cold morning air. His hands moved with a strange, practiced calm, checking the coupling valves, tightening the feed hose, tapping the brass pressure gauge with a knuckle. The M2 flamethrower sat on the ground like a sleeping animal, a heavy, hissing, fuel-filled creature, and Red was about to wake it. You could almost hear the soft glug of thickened gasoline sloshing inside the twin tanks. The third cylinder, compressed nitrogen, gleamed under a smear of frost. A rubber hose ran from the tanks to the wand-like projector resting in the sergeant's hands. To most soldiers, it looked like equipment. To the men who used it, it felt like something else entirely. Private Morales, the youngest in the squad, swallowed hard as he watched Red working. "Feels heavier today," he muttered. Red didn't look up. "That's because you know what's waiting for us." And Morales did know. They all knew. The Germans weren't afraid of rifles. They weren't afraid of grenades. They weren't even afraid of tanks. But this was different. Red finally stood, adjusting the straps across his shoulders. The entire assembly weighed over 60 pounds, more than enough to slow a man in normal terrain, let alone a death trap like Hürtgen. Behind him, Lieutenant Carter crouched over a crude map scratched out on the forest floor. "We've got a bunker here," he said, pointing to a cluster of charcoal marks. "MG-42 nest covering the approach. Wire, mines, classic setup." Morales exhaled. "So we torch it." Carter didn't smile. "Exactly." The squad knew the Germans would fight tooth and nail to keep that bunker. They always did. The machine guns were devastating, but the will behind them was worse. And when the Americans got close, when cover thinned and the approach narrowed, there was only one tool cruel enough to break that kind of resistance. Red slid the projector into his gloved hand. The igniter coil clicked as he tested it. A tiny arc of electricity snapped across the muzzle, bright enough to see even in the pale morning light. Morales shivered. "Why do they call it forbidden?" Red glanced at him. Because the fire doesn't care who it touches. It was true. The flamethrower was considered brutal, even by wartime standards. Too brutal, too psychological, too primal. The Germans claimed it violated the spirit of war, but the Americans weren't using it to make a point. They were using it because nothing else worked. Carter stood. Harrison, your point. Morales, your backup fuel. Everyone else covers. The squad moved out, slipping between the blackened trunks like ghosts. The air still tasted of last night.
What survives the fire? The shadow inside the bunker shifted again. Slow, uneven, desperate. The kind of movement that came from a man acting on instinct alone. A man half blind, half burned, but still clutching a weapon because the alternative was a kind of death he refused to accept. Red steadied the projector. "Movement," he murmured, barely audible. Morales tensed behind him. "Where?" Red didn't answer. "What survives the fire?" He didn't need to. Another shape rose inside the bunker, this time unmistakable. Slow, uneven, desperate. The kind of movement that came from a man acting on instinct alone. The German soldier stumbled forward, coughing, a man half blind, one hand gripping the side of the embrasure, as if pulling himself out of hell by sheer force of will to accept. His uniform smoldered. Red steadied the projector. Tiny embers dancing along his collar. He murmured. His eyes were wide, wild and unfocused, Morales tensed, but locked on Red. "Where?" He raised his MP40. He didn't need to. Fired first. Another shape rose in the smoke. Another burst of fire tore from the projector, a billowing stream that engulfed the bunker entrance in a pulse of blinding orange. The German silhouette vanished instantly, coughing, swallowed by flame. One hand gripping the side of the embrasure, as if pulling himself out of hell by sheer force of will. The roar echoed through the trees, his uniform bouncing between charred trunks, tiny embers dancing along his collar. Looking for a place to die. His eyes were wide, wild and unfocused, but locked on Red. Burning timber. He raised his MP40. And something else the men never spoke about. Another burst of fire tore from the projector, a billowing stream that engulfed the bunker entrance in a pulse of blinding orange. Carter moved up behind him. The German silhouette vanished, covering the bunker with his M1. Swallowed by flame. Someone still inside? Smoke. Red nodded by silence. Not anymore. The roar echoed through the trees. For a moment, none of them bouncing between charred trunks, crackled softly looking for a place to die. Trees dripping fire. The smell hit them drifting like black snow. Fuel. The MG-42 that had been hammering them only minutes before, something else now lay silent, cooled by the same flames that had silenced its crew. Not all the way. Morales approached just cautiously enough to breathe. "Sergeant." Carter moved up behind him, covering the bunker with his M1. He stared into the bunker's burning maw. Someone still inside, watching the flames twist and curl inside. Not anymore. Like serpents. For a moment, none of them spoke. The forest crackled softly around them. You could train a man to use the flamethrower. Ash drifting. You could train him to carry it. You could train him to survive long enough to fire them only minutes before. But there was no training for what came silent. Cool. No manual for the sound a man made when fire took the air from his lungs. Morales approached cautiously. No handbook for the smell that clung to your clothes and never left. Red didn't answer. Red finally stared into the bunker's burning maw, watching the flames twist and curl inside like serpents. And there were. He'd been doing this for months. Didn't end with a single firestorm. Too many months. The forest was riddled with German defenses, use the flamethrower, interlocking trenches. You could train him to carry pillboxes. You could train him to survive long enough to fire it. But there was no training for what came after. No manual for the sound a man made when fire took the air from his lungs. No handbook for the smell that clung to your clothes and never left. Red finally exhaled. That's one bunker. There'll be more. And there were. Hurton didn't end with a single firestorm. The forest was riddled with German defenses, interlocking trenches, pillboxes, firing pits, everything wired to kill. The M2 flame